Welcome to the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable's tribute to our friend, Paul King. I'm Kati Koerner. I'm the Director of Education at Lincoln Center Theater and a member of the Board of Directors of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable. Today, you will hear from a few of Paul's many friends among the Roundtable's community of arts education practitioners. You will hear about the many ways that Paul tirelessly advocated for and supported partnerships between schools and cultural organizations. I first met Paul during his days at the New York City Opera and happily served on committees with him at Lincoln Center. Once he joined the New York City Department of Education, I had the pleasure of working with him on a wide array of projects over the years, through my work at Lincoln Center and through the Roundtable. Paul always brought his sensibility as an artist and as a parent of two daughters in New York City's public schools to his work with the Department of Education. He was both a bureaucracy whisperer and also, on occasion, a bureaucracy translator, both invaluable for those of us in the cultural community. Paul had a great laugh that ranged from a conspiratorial cackle to a full-on laugh that started in his shoulders and spread from there. He loved his family fiercely and shared their accomplishments proudly. I can count the number of times I saw Paul in his shirt sleeves on one hand. At all other times, he wore suits in the most fantastic colors and textures, usually paired with creative socks. Paul had style. Paul was my friend and my colleague, and I will remember him always.
Hi, I'm Jen DiBella.
And I'm Shobha Kavanakudio, and we're the co-chairs of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable.
And on behalf of the entire Roundtable community, we want to acknowledge Paul's lifelong commitment to providing the young people of New York City with a robust arts education.
He was fiercely committed to access and equity. His vision for quality arts education for students throughout the New York City public schools included strong partnerships with the cultural community, and he was an important advocate for those partnerships.
Throughout his tenure at the DOE's Office of Arts and Special Projects, he was a great friend to the Roundtable.
Paul's legacy will live on with each young artist, and he will greatly be missed.
Almost every Sunday, for 9 years, I would meet Paul in Central Park, across from his building, with his two dogs, Duke and Daisy, and my two dogs, Massimo and Francesco. Paul always brought 2 mugs of coffee, and some weeks he brought his homemade blueberry buckle, which is to this day the best coffee cake I've ever had. We would sit and watch our dogs play, and we did what all dog owners do. We talked about our dogs. It was a much-needed break from our busy work weeks, and I looked forward to what I came to call Sundays in the Park with Paul. I met Paul in 2003 when Sharon Dunn asked me to be on a committee that interviewed the finalists for the citywide director of theater position. We interviewed 12 of probably the most impressive and respected people in arts education, and afterwards, it was clear to all of us that Paul was the person for the job. It was unanimous. Soon after that, Paul asked me to be a contributing writer on the blueprint. We worked together for almost 9 months on the acting, directing, and playwriting sections. I would write a few pages and send them to Paul, and he would send them back to me with his suggestions and edits. And as with everything I came to learn about Paul, his ideas were right on the money, always. Working with him on that project and over the years was probably the best collaboration of my life, and I'm grateful to him for that. There are many moments with Paul that stand out, but there's one that stays with me more than most. It was 2006, and it was on the final day of a week-long PD for teachers on directing that Paul asked me to teach. The teachers had just finished staging scenes and songs with students, and when the sharing was over, I turned and looked at Paul, and he had tears running down his face. The teachers and I were shocked and a little surprised. We thought, did we fail? Was this so awful? And Paul looked at the teachers, and with tears in his eyes, he said, "It warms my heart to see all of you who gave up your winter break to spend 6 hours a day here in the pursuit of excellence and personal growth. And it makes me very hopeful for the future, knowing that you are teaching our kids. Well, we were all in tears. The teachers looked at Paul with so much admiration. They had never had that kind of affirmation from an administrator before, and it changed their lives. And that was Paul in a nutshell. He was a dedicated champion for teachers and students. Everything he did, every breath he took, was in service to his belief that kids need art in their lives and in their schools, and that teachers need champions in their corners to support them. What I learned from Paul was immeasurable. I'm a better teacher, and I'm a better person because of him. I will miss his wisdom, his leadership, his compassion, his humor. But most of all, I will miss our Sundays in the park with our dogs and his blueberry buckle. Thank you, Paul.
Hello, my name is Madeline Cohen. I'm the Education Director at Symphony Space. Back in 2001, I got a call from Paul King, who was the Education Director at the New York City Opera, inquiring about a possible collaboration between Symphony Space and City Opera. So we set up a meeting, and I'd say within 10 or 15 minutes, we realized that actually that collaboration was not going to work. But we ended up talking for another hour or more about everything, opera, the arts, education, our lives, and we really became friends. I worked on the blueprint with him once he became the director of the Office of Arts and Special Projects. And even when that work tapered off, and I really only saw him once a year at the annual Arts and Cultural Education Services Fair at the Brooklyn Museum, I always got such a warm reception from him, and there always was that warm feeling that I will treasure and remember always.
Paul was a tireless champion for the media arts education community. He spearheaded the creation of the Moving Image Blueprint and offered extensive professional development opportunities for media arts educators. One of his dreams was to create a New York City public school student film festival. In 2019, that dream became a reality. He celebrated the young artist's use of film to tell stories, make us laugh, and move us to action. The 2020 online festival was dedicated to Paul's memory and his legacy.
I'm David Shookhoff, Director of Education at Manhattan Theater Club and the founding chair of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable. And I was fortunate enough to have known Paul King for some 30 years. Throughout his career, Paul was an ardent and courageous champion for the arts, a diligent and dedicated leader, a tireless and formidable advocate, and an imaginative, innovative, and effective educator. I still recall the intellect and the insight he displayed years ago in his presentation on the extraordinary programs he had created as the education director at New York City Opera, integrating opera production with social studies themes. I think that was my first encounter with Paul, and I remember thinking at the time, boy, this guy is good. As the executive director of the DOE Arts Office, Paul created a legacy of programs and policies that will long outlive his sad and untimely departure, ensuring that the arts remain central to the lives of the city's children for years into the future. It was a privilege and an honor to have collaborated with Paul and to have learned from him over the years. We will all miss his leadership and his vision. But most of all, I will miss Paul's friendship. We were neighbors, and we would often ride the C train together at 8 a.m., sharing our frustrations and our aspirations on the way to work. And we would get together regularly in Central Park on Sunday mornings. I would finish up my morning run on the Great Hill where Paul and Steve DiMenna would be walking their dogs. Paul would sometimes offer me a tissue to kind of spruce up, and after a while I got the hint and brought my own. Paul and Steve would palaver about their pooches, a topic on which I had very little to offer, though I did get fairly adept at throwing sticks and balls. But I relished and cherished our conversations about arts education and public policy and the latest theater gossip and the newest restaurants and the doings of our families. It is those Sundays in the park with Paul that I will miss most of all.
Paul King. His passing is such a loss to the arts community. With Paul as Executive Director of the Office in Arts and Special Projects, the pendulum swung toward expanding arts in the schools, especially where it was needed most. He was a passionate advocate and also someone who really knew how to work within the system and create efficient delivery systems. He was able to staff up both in the classroom and in the support staff at the Department of Ed. I first knew Paul when he was Director of Education of the New York City Opera around the time I became Head of Education at New York Philharmonic around 2004. He was a wonderful colleague across the campus, but little did I suspect then what kind of a leader he was destined to become. He became first the head of theater at the city schools and then the executive director of the Office of Arts and Special Projects. And was he ever the right man for that time? I became co-chair of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable around that time, and my co-chair Kati Koerner and I would have coffee with Paul several times a year to keep up to date on changes at the DOE and to keep the whole cultural community, which we represent through the Roundtable, tied in with that. And boy, did change come fast with Paul and under Chancellor Carmen Farina and the de Blasio administration. As he engineered this radical expansion of arts teachers in the classroom and of the support staff at the Department of Education necessary for them to do their job well, he would come to see us for coffee, and he was just ever unflappable. Never a word about the significant health challenges he was going through personally. He might look tired, but his mind was always full of ideas and energy and moving forward, finding the right people for the right jobs around him. He seized the moment, and we're all better off for it. I miss Paul so much, and I miss knowing that there was such a pro and such a caring man at the center of what we do for the arts and for the students of New York City.